Florida Building Code accessibility volume. And as Crystal said, you will get health, safety, and welfare credits for this course. And my name is John Farinelli with JC Code and Construction Consultants, and I will be your instructor for this course. All right. Now, this course is designed, ladies and gentlemen, to review the technical provisions for the design and construction of accessible recreational boating facilities as required under Section 1003 of the Florida Building Code Accessibility Volume. Now, I am sure you're all aware that back in 2010, the Americans with Disabilities Act standards were updated. And one of the major changes was the addition of Chapter 10, which covers all the recreational facilities. I mean, you name it, it's covered under recreational facilities. Golf, miniature golf, uh, obviously boating facilities, also includes fishing piers, anything from a recreational standpoint, shooting ranges, you name it, it's in there. So we're going to take a look at all of that good stuff there, give you some tips and some pointers here about when these recreational boating facilities have to be accessible and the technical provisions for those accessible items. Now, first thing to look at is applicability. And of course, we know that the ADA covers Title II, which is state and local government, recreational boating facilities, and many, many, many government jurisdictions, be they county, city, you name it, they have government-owned recreational boating facilities. So under Title II, yeah, they're going to have to be accessible. And the same thing with Title III. Commercial facilities, places of public accommodation, it doesn't matter if they're for profit or not for profit. It is a public accommodation. Absolutely. Now, of course, if you were with us here yesterday, I'm sure you heard me harp on the fact that Chapter 2 in the Accessibility Code is pretty much the top dog when it comes to importance of the chapters, because that's where you get the where and the how many. And after we've got Chapter 2 settled down, we can work through Chapters 3 to 10 for the technical. So when it comes to Chapter 2 and we talk about recreational boating facilities, it's 206 for the accessible route. Take a look. 206.2.10, recreational boating facilities. Boat slips required to comply with 235.2 and boarding piers at boat launch ramps required to comply with 235.3 shall be on an accessible route. Accessible routes serving recreational boating facilities shall comply with Chapter 4, except as modified by 1003.2. So as you can see here, it all starts with Chapter 4 because that chapter deals specifically with both interior and exterior routes. However, we do get some modifications specific to recreational boating facilities by 1003.2. And the first thing that can come to your mind there are the ramps going down to the piers and the docks and such, because in a lot of cases they're tidal. So we do get some further information there. Now, of course, when we talk about the accessible route, you got to have at least one accessible route to a building or facility entrance from each site arrival point. And everything is consistent within the accessibility code for that accessible route. I mean, you got to have accessible parking and then an accessible route down to the accessible dock. Absolutely. Now, we're still not done with Chapter 2 because, again, you saw that reference to 235 in Chapter 2. Yeah, And here we go. Here is Chapter 2, Scoping Recreational Boating Facilities. Boat slips 235.2. Boat slips complying with 1003.3.1 shall be provided in accordance with Table 235.2. Where the number of boat slips is not identified, each 40 feet of boat slip edge provided along the perimeter of the pier shall be counted as one boat slip for the purpose of this section. Now, we do have an advisory under this section, okay? And that advisory states that the requirement for boat slips also applies to piers where boat slips are not demarcated. For example, a single pier 25 feet long and 5 feet wide, which is the minimum width specified by Section 1003.3, allows boats to moor on three sides. Because the number of boat slips is not demarcated, the total length of the boat slip edge must be used to determine the number of boat slips provided, and in this case it would be 2. This number is based on a specification in Section 235.2 that each 40 feet of boat slip edge or fraction thereof counts as one boat slip. In this example, Table 235.2 would require one boat slip to be accessible. Now, looking at the table, very, very similar to the number of parking spaces required under the accessibility code. I think you would agree. It's always based on the total number provided and then the minimum number required to be accessible. So if all you have is a maximum of 25 boat slips, you only need one. And then, of course, it goes up as the number of slips provided goes up. And then we're not really talking a lot when you think about it, because take a look at this. If you've got 1,000 boat slips, only 12 need to be accessible. That's not a lot when you really think about it. Now, of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that, okay? Because take a look at 235.2.1, dispersion. Boat slips complying with 1003.3.1 shall be dispersed throughout the various type of boat slips provided. Where the minimum number of boat slips required to comply with 1003.3.1 has been met, no further dispersion shall be required. Now, give this some thought, because you saw the table about how many needed to be provided. But as I said, it gets a little bit more complicated than that because of this section on dispersion and that key language there throughout the various types. Because you know the where it works in marinas. We even have an advisory to this section. Types of boat slips are based on the size of the boat slips, whether single berth or double berth, shallow water or deep water, transient or longer term lease, covered or uncovered, and whether slips are equipped with features such as telephone, water, electricity, or cable connections. The term boat slip is intended to cover any pier area other than launch ramp boarding piers, where recreational boats are moored for the purpose of berthing, embarking, or disembarking. For example, a fuel pier may contain boat slips, and this type of short-term slip would be included in determining compliance with 235.2. Now, let's talk about that for a second here, okay? When we talk about dispersion, you know the way it works in arenas. First off, they generally segregate sailboats from power boats, and then the power boats are segregated by size, up to 20 feet, then 30 feet, 40 feet, so on and so forth. So when they're segregated like that, you're going to have to provide the number of slips for each type. That's the way it works. Now, accessible boat slips do not need to be marked and are not reserved in the same way as accessible vehicle parking spaces. For example, facilities should not hold the accessible slips open for persons with disabilities until all other slips are filled. At that point, the slip may be made available for general use. For seasonal slip holders, accessible slips should be held until the expiration period for slip contracts has expired. And again, key point. Facilities should hold the accessible slips open because they're not marked. They're not marked. Now, John's making a comment here, a question, is there even a marina in Florida with 1,000 boat slips? Hard to say. Hard to say. My guess off the top of my head is probably not. I know some marinas down in Fort Lauderdale and Miami. They have hundreds, literally hundreds, but whether it approaches 1,000, I don't know. I couldn't answer that. But let's suffice to say that some of those marinas, especially down in Dade and Broward County, you need a golf cart to get around them. All right, so much for dispersion. Let's go now to 235.3, boarding piers at boat launch ramps. Where boarding piers are provided at boat launch ramps, at least 5%, but no fewer than one of the boarding piers shall comply with 1003.3.2. And generally, when we start looking at boarding piers at boat launch ramps, it can be a single ramp, depending on the size, could be a double. Rare cases, again, you may see triples as far as the ramps go. But in any event, at least 5%, but no fewer than one. All right. Here we go with Chapter 10, Recreational Facilities, Section 1003. First thing, again, is the accessible route, 1003.2. Accessible routes serving recreational boating facilities, including gangways and floating piers, shall comply with Chapter 4, except as modified by the exceptions in 1003.2. And that ties into the same language, similar language anyway, that you saw in Chapter 2. And of course, the accessibility code requires that at least one accessible route connect accessible buildings, facilities, elements, and spaces on a site. Accessible boat slips, accessible boarding piers at boat launch ramps, and other accessible spaces and elements within a boating facility must also be connected by an accessible route. And the accessible route must comply with the accessibility provisions for the location, width, which is, of course, minimum 36 inches, passing space, headroom, surface conditions, slope, which is a maximum of 1 in 12, because after 1 in 12 it becomes a ramp, changes in level, door clearances, egress, and areas of rescue assistance unless otherwise modified by specific provisions outlined in the code. Now let's go ahead and jump to a subsection here and go to 1003.2.1 and talk about boat slips. Accessible routes serving boat slips shall be permitted to use the exceptions in 1003.2.1. Now, this section continues because we do have three exceptions, and these are important exceptions, especially when we start talking about the boat slips. One, where an existing gangway or series of gangways is replaced or altered, an increase in the length of the gangway shall not be required to comply with 1003.2, unless required by 202.4. And that is an alteration affecting a primary function area. Number 2, gangways shall not be required to comply with the maximum rise specified in 405.6. Number 3, where the total length of a gangway or series of gangways serving as part of the required accessible route is 80 feet minimum, gangways shall not be required to comply with 405.2. And as you can see, that added language that I'm showing you here in red, right here, and right here, I put that in there to make it very, very clear that because of tidal situations, the accessibility code provisions have got to give you a little bit of a break there. Because if they hold your feet to the fire for the maximum rise, okay, and the maximum slope, how are you going to do that in a tidal situation when you have tides that can drop, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 feet in some areas? So it makes nothing but total sense to have these provisions in here. All right, and let's see. Steve is asking a question. Is the scoping requirements for accessible slips an absolute number based on the count of all types, or is it determined by the type of slip? Well, again, Steve, as you saw there, you have to disperse. So if the marina is set up to where they have things segregated, like sailboats over here, and then as I mentioned, power boats divided up into classes by length or width or however they do it, you have to provide the minimum number for each class. So you'd have the minimum number for sailboats, minimum number for power boats up to 20 feet, minimum number for up to 30 feet, and so on. That's the way it would work. All right. Now here is a pretty good shot here with the advisory to these gangways and such. This is exception number 3. The following example shows how exception 3 would be applied. A gangway is provided to a floating pier, which is required to be on an accessible route. The vertical distance is 10 feet between the elevation where the gangway departs the landside connection and the elevation of the pier surface at the lowest water level. Exception 3 permits the gangway to be 80 feet long. Another design solution would be to have two 40-foot plus continuous gangways joined together at a float, where the float, as the water level falls, will stop dropping at an elevation 5 feet below the landside connection. The length of the transition plates would not be included in determining if the gangways meet the requirements of the exception. So, accessible gangway, 1 in 12 maximum slope, or at least 80 feet long, or non-accessible gangway less than 80 feet. And you can do it. You can have two, one accessible, one isn't. But again, it's pretty much a large facility, right? So depending on the size of the facility is going to dictate what the design requires. All right. Now, there are a couple more exceptions here. 4, where facilities contain fewer than 25 boat slips and the total length of the gangway or series of gangways serving as part of the required accessible route is 30 feet minimum, gangways shall not be required to comply with 405.2. And that, of course, again, is your maximum slope. Number 5, where gangways connect to transition plates, landings specified by 407.5 shall not be required. Now, 405.7 is titled Landings, and that section states that ramps shall have landings at the top and bottom of each ramp run. But you don't have to worry about compliance there because you've got transition plates. And of course, you got to have landings unless you meet this exception. top and bottom. So let's talk about that a little bit. Gangways on existing boating facilities may be repaired or replaced without triggering the requirement to increase the gangway length. However, if the areas altered contain primary functions, such as a boat slip or boat dock, existing gangways are considered part of the path of travel to the altered primary function area and must be made accessible if the cost to do so is not disproportionate, and that's where the 20% rule kicks in. Now, the DOJ has determined that it is not disproportionate to spend up to an additional 20% of the overall cost of alterations to the primary functions areas to make the path of travel accessible. Here is 202.4, alterations affecting primary function area. In addition to the requirements of 202.3, an alteration that affects or could affect the usability of or access to an area containing a primary function shall be made so as to ensure that, to the maximum extent feasible, the path of travel to the altered area, including the restrooms, telephones, and drinking fountains serving the altered area, are readily accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities, unless such alterations are disproportionate to the overall alterations in terms of cost. And there are 6 exceptions to that provision. All right. Let's go now to 6, 7, and 8. 6. Where gangways and transition plates connect and are required to have handrails, handrail extensions shall not be required. Where handrail extensions are provided on gangways or transition plates, the handrail extensions shall not be required to be parallel with the ground or floor surface. And again, that's because of tidal conditions. 7. The cross slope specified in 403.3 and 405.3 for gangways, for transition plates, floating piers that are part of the accessible route shall be measured in the static position. And then number 8, changes in level complying with 303.3 and 303.4 shall be permitted on the surfaces of gangways and boat launch ramps. Now, you've heard the term a couple of times, transition plate, and you see these quite a bit. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. This area right here, transitions from the ramp to the pier. You need to have a landing if the slope of the plate is greater than 1 in 20. That's what it's all about. Because transition plates are sloping pedestrian walking surfaces located at the end of the gangway. Now, gangways are not required to have landings at the end if the transition plates are provided. And if the slope of the transition plate is greater than 1 in 20, well, the transition plate must have a landing at the non-gangway end of the transition plate and comply with other accessibility code ramp requirements, because that's what's going to end up happening. Now, notice that the gangways and transition plates connect and are required to have handrails, but handrail extensions are not required. All right, let's go to 1003.2.2 now, and we'll talk about boarding piers at boat launch ramps. Accessible routes serving boarding piers at boat launch ramps shall be permitted to use the exceptions in 1003.2.2. Exceptions. 1. Accessible routes serving floating boarding piers shall be permitted to use exceptions 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8 in 1003.2.1, which is what we just covered. 2. where the total length of the gangway or series of gangways serving as part of a required accessible route is 30 feet minimum, gangways shall not be required to comply with 405.2. 3. Where the accessible route serving a floating boarding pier or skid pier is located within a boat launch ramp, the portion of the accessible route located within the boat launch ramp shall not be required to comply with 405. Now, the next pertinent section, if you will, is when we start talking about clearances. And this is 1003.3.1. Boat slips shall provide clear pier space 60 inches wide minimum and at least as long as the boat slips. Each 10 feet maximum of linear pier edge serving boat slips shall contain at least one continuous clear opening 60 inches wide minimum. And I have a graphic here that shows it exactly. Here's the 60 inches clear space. Here's your 40 feet of boat slip. And that works. Here's another real good shot here. Full length of the boat slip, that 40 feet, 60 inches minimum in the width. You are allowed areas of obstructions, but you need at least 60 inches between the obstructions. Notice the centers, 10 feet maximum, and you're golden. You're good to go. Now, of course, there are exceptions. Clear pier space shall be permitted to be 36 inches wide minimum for a length of 24 inches maximum, provided that multiple 36-inch wide segments are separated by segments that are 60 inches wide minimum and 60 inches long minimum. Number 2, edge protection shall be permitted at the continuous clear openings, provided that it is 4 inches high maximum and 2 inches wide maximum. And here is a good shot here of exception number 1. Again, we still have 60 inches in the width. I got 60 inches, but look what happens in the reduction for the width. I can reduce it down to 36 inches, but only for a length of 24 inches. And notice, I still got to have at least 36 inches, even if you have to have a pier or whatever it is, a power pedestal, whatever it is, got to have at least 36. But again, even if it is a power pedestal, power box, whatever you want to call it, combination unit, whatever, can't be any more than 24. Now, of course, edge protection is very, very important. And generally what you're looking at here, 4 inches maximum, 2 inches maximum for that edge protection. And we all know why the edge protection's there. It's for obvious reasons. All right. And Pedro's asking, what is the minimum handrail height? There is no requirement for handrails on a boarding pier. No requirement. Fishing pier is a little different story, but not for boarding piers for boat slips and such. All right, this section continues. Here's exception number 3. In existing piers, clear pier space shall be permitted to be located perpendicular to the boat slip and shall extend the width of the boat slip where the facility has at least one boat slip complying with 1003.3. And further compliance with 1003.3 would result in a reduction in the number of boat slips available or result in a reduction of the widths of existing slips. Now, there is an advisory to exception number 3 here, and it states that where the conditions in exception number 3 are satisfied, existing facilities are only required to have one accessible boat slip with a pier clearance which runs the length of the slip. All other accessible slips are allowed to have the required pier clearance at the head of the slip. Under this exception, at piers with perpendicular boat slips, the width of most finger piers will remain unchanged. However, where mooring systems for floating piers are replaced as part of pier alteration projects, an opportunity may exist for increasing accessibility. Piers may be reconfigured to allow an increase in the number of wider finger piers and serve as accessible boat slips. All right, let's move forward now and go to 1003.3.2, boarding pier clearances. Boarding piers at boat launch ramps shall provide clear pier space 60 inches wide minimum and shall extend the full length of the boarding pier. Every 10 feet maximum of linear pier edge shall contain at least one continuous clear opening, 60 inches wide minimum. And this should look very, very similar to what you've seen previously. Still looking at 60 inches. And notice if you have an obstruction here, it's measured from that obstruction, not from the piling. It would be measured from the obstruction. So as long as you've got 60 inches minimum in between the obstructions, and it can only go 10 feet before you have to have another one within that next 10 feet dimension, you're okay with that. You're okay with that. Here is an exception. The clear pier space shall be permitted to be 36 inches wide minimum for a length of 24 inches maximum, provided that multiple 36-inch wide segments are separated by segments that are 60 inches wide minimum and 60 inches long minimum. And again, that should look very, very, very familiar, okay? Very familiar because the exception provisions, if you will, similar to what you just saw earlier. We do have an advisory, as a matter of fact, for this section also. The advisory states that these requirements do not establish a minimum length for accessible boarding piers at boat launch ramps. The accessible boarding piers should have a length at least equal to that of other boarding piers provided at the facility. If no other boarding pier is provided, the pier would have a length equal to what would have been provided if no access requirements applied. The entire length of an accessible boarding pier would be required to comply with the same technical provisions that apply to an accessible boat slip, and that's why the dimensions are the same. For example, at a launch ramp, if a 20-foot long accessible boarding pier is provided, the entire 20 feet must comply with the pier clearance requirements in 1003.3. Likewise, as the 60-foot long accessible boarding pier is provided, the pier clearance requirements in 1003.3 would apply to the entire 60 feet. And that only makes sense. The entire portion has got to be accessible. Now again, clear space reduction under exception number 1. The technical provisions are across the board do not really change. Still 60 inches wide, face of the piling, face of the piling. I can drop it from 60 to 36 in the width, but again, only for 24 inches. And the same deal. You've got something else going on here, a power pedestal or something. All right. As long as I've got 36 inches, I'm good to go. I'm good to go. And John is asking, any determination of elevation above water surface to boarding piers? I'm not really sure what you mean by that, John. Generally, when new facilities are constructed, they're floaters. They are floaters because in a lot of cases, with fixed piers and you have a pretty significant tidal drop, it just makes it more of a challenge to embark and disembark from the vessel. But I think I know where you're going with this is whether or not you need to have oh God, I'm gonna go brain dead here. If you need to have an accessible boarding platform or something of that nature to make the transition. But we'll get to that. I think that's where you're going. And Steve is saying, clarify when the obstruction can reduce from 60 to 36 and when the 60-inch clear cannot include the obstruction. Well, it's pretty straightforward. Okay. You've got to have 60 inches from the face of the pier to the face of the pier. But you can reduce that 60-inch clear dimension down to 36 inches wide, which is what you need minimum for an accessible route. But you can only do it for a distance of 24 inches. That's it. That is it. And Jeffrey's asking, is the raised toe edge in the 36-inch clear width? Well, again, if you've got a toe edge going across here, you're going to have at least 36 inches between it. Okay. And let's see. And let's see. Jeff is asking, is the 2-inch wide by 4-inch toe edge? Okay. Not exactly sure what he means by that. Oh, is it an obstruction? No, it's not considered to be an obstruction. All right. Good question. Let's go to exception number 2. Here you go. This is talking specifically about your edge protection. Edge protection shall be permitted at the continuous clear openings, provided that it is 4 inches high maximum and 2 inches wide maximum. And that's how the code looks at it. And that's why I say it's not considered an obstruction. Okay. And in fact, there is actually an advisory to this exception when we talk about clearances. Okay. All right. Now, here's a good shot. Come on, computer. There's exception right there. And again, let me double check something here. Come on, computer. Yeah. Okay. 2 inches max, 4 inches. So 4 inches high, 2 inches wide, not considered an obstruction. All right. Now, the next thing we need to take a look at here, and believe it or not, we actually have to go back to chapter 2, scoping, and take a look at operable parts. 205.1. Operable parts on accessible elements, accessible routes, and inaccessible rooms shall comply with 309, which pretty much means they need to be within the reach ranges, right? But look at exception number 7. Cleats and other boat securement devices shall not be required to comply with 309.3, which again makes crystal clear. You don't have to make these within the reach ranges because again, that's what 309 is all about. That is what 309 is all about. And it wouldn't make any sense to try and make the cleats within the reach ranges. The same thing would go forward with davits or mooring whips or anything like that. They don't need to be within the reach ranges. George is asking, is the edge protection included in the 60 inches? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Now, when we talk about the reach ranges, okay, as you saw, mooring devices such as cleats, davits, mooring whips, they don't have to be within the reach ranges, but everything else does. Hose bibs, power pedestals, you name it, they have to provide the reach ranges. Now, looking in the accessibility code, and you look at 309, okay, okay, here's forward reach, 308.2.1, unobstructed. Where forward reach is unobstructed, the high forward reach shall be 48 inches maximum, and the low forward reach will be 15 inches minimum above the finished floor or ground. Here's obstructed high reach, 308.2.2. Where a high forward reach is over an obstruction, the clear floor space shall extend beneath the element for a distance of not less than the required reach depth over the obstruction. The high forward reach shall be 48 inches maximum when the reach depth is 20 inches maximum. Where the reach depth exceeds 20 inches, the high forward reach shall be 44 inches maximum, and the reach depth shall be 25 inches maximum. Now, I think you would agree that generally speaking, forward reach is not really a concern when we talk about accessible piers and boat ramps and things like that, because it's pretty much more about side reach. 308.3.1 unobstructed. Where a clear floor or ground space allows a parallel approach to an element, and the side reach is unobstructed, the high side reach shall be 48 inches maximum, and the low side reach shall be 15 inches minimum above the finished floor or ground. And there are two exceptions. One, an obstruction shall be permitted between the clear floor or ground space and the element where the depth of the obstruction is 10 inches maximum. And that's exactly what I'm showing you here in this graphic. And then operable parts of fuel dispensers shall be permitted to be 54 inches maximum, measured from the surface of the vehicular way where fuel dispensers are installed on existing curbs. And the general consensus there is when you are at a fuel dock at a marina, this same exception would apply. Because in a lot of cases, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but it's pretty much the same gas pump at a marina than you have at a vehicle service station. It's the same thing. All right. And Mr. Anonymous is asking, tactile warning devices, do we need to provide raised edges everywhere? Not sure exactly what you're talking about there. Are you talking about, I think you're talking about the raised edge, the raised edge. And you can, but doesn't necessarily have to be everywhere. All right, now here is 308.2, obstructed high reach, where a clear floor or ground space allows a parallel approach to an element and the high side reach is over an obstruction. The height of the obstruction shall be 34 inches maximum, and the depth of the obstruction shall be 24 inches maximum. The high side reach shall be 48 inches maximum for a reach depth of 10 inches maximum. Where the reach depth exceeds 10 inches, the high side reach shall be 46 inches maximum for a reach depth of 24 inches maximum. And then you get a couple of exceptions here for the top of washing machines and clothes dryers. And again, the operable parts of fuel dispensers. All right, now here is a good shot of it graphically. Obstructed high reach, 10 inches maximum, 34 to the top of the obstruction, 48 inch to the device. But if it's greater than 10 up to a maximum of 24, same 34-inch height, it drops by 2 inches. And Brendan is asking, how extensive are requirements for signage and high contrast walking surfaces for the visually impaired? Are these elements only required along accessible routes? If left to the individual case interpretation, I see Pandora asking, what if? All right, here's the way it looks, Brendan, as far as visually impaired and the walking surfaces and such. The accessibility code doesn't contain a lot of requirements for striping or anything like that. Like, for instance, striping the nosing of a set of stairs. That's not in the accessibility code. It's not required. It is helpful for people with low vision, but it is not required. The only time the accessibility code talks about striping nosings and things like that is when we get into transportation facilities and escalators, because the escalators come under the ASME standard, and that standard requires a 2-inch stripe at the first two steps of an escalator. But that's it. There's nothing else in the accessibility code. Nothing there. So you don't have to worry about that. All right. Now, again, I'm sure some people have had the question about, do you need a transfer method to get people from the pier into the boat? Well, that is very, very helpful, absolutely. But believe it or not, it is not required under the code. It is not required. It is very, very helpful and highly recommended, but not required. All right, couple of more things here before we bring this puppy home. Launch ramps without boarding piers. There are no specific provisions that address access to launch ramps without boarding piers. The Department of Justice advises that if there are no applicable scoping requirements, such as how many features must be accessible, then a reasonable number, but at least one, must be accessible. It is recommended that an accessible route serve at least one launch ramp. Now, the portion of the accessible route located within the launch ramp is not required to comply with the slope requirements for an accessible route. All right. Let's check and see if there are any other questions coming in, because we are right about at the end of the presentation, ladies and gentlemen. And that will conclude the presentation on accessible boating facilities. Any other questions? Anything else you want to talk about here? Is that it? All right. Looks like we don't have any other questions coming in. Let's see. Here we go. There's one from Steve. Is there a requirement for slips at seawalls? Well, Steve, if the seawall is, well, let me rephrase that. In most marinas, you're going to have some kind of a seawall situation. And if they're using that area along the seawall for boat slips, then the answer is going to be yes, because remember, every 40 feet is going to constitute one boat slip. So if they are actually using the area along the seawall, then yes, yes. And Patrick is saying he did an accessible kayak launch for the University of Central Florida, which was quite interesting. I bet you it was, Patrick, an accessible kayak launch. I'd like to see some details on that. I bet you that was interesting. Okay. All right. Looks like that's going to be about it. Looks like that's going to be about it. All right. Well, Crystal, I will turn it back over to you, and we'll take our 10-minute break, I guess, and get into the next presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John. Wonderful first presentation. Um, just a reminder, if you guys would like to stay on for the second presentation that will begin at 12:05 to 12:55 on FBC fire alarm and detection systems, just stay logged in. So, I see there are a couple questions that came in,
Yeah,
John.
just hold them there. I'll get to them
Okay,
just a
sounds
second.
good.
Let me fire this puppy up.
Okay, sounds good.
Oops, wrong button. Oh, come on, where'd you go? There you are. Okay. No, that's wrong.
Just
Yeah,
in presentation mode, that's all.
yeah, there's too many buttons.
There we go.
All right. And John is also saying that there's an accessible kayak launch at Upper Tampa Bay Park. Okay, that's a good thing. All right. And Brendan, he's asking kind of a personal question here. Brendan, that's really not appropriate to discuss in presentations like this. If you're interested in talking to me further, just shoot me an email. Okay. All right. Very good.
All right, we will see everyone back at 12:05.
Excellent.
Thanks, John. All right, John, you ready?
Yes, ma'am, certainly are.
All right. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. If you're just now joining us, we'll be starting the second presentation. That will be 12:05 to 12:55 on the FBC fire alarm and detection systems. Just stay logged in. So as long as you can hear and see the presentation, you are logged in. So I'll hand it over to you, John. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have another 1 hour presentation that comes out of the 8th edition of the Florida Building Code volume, and we're going to talk about fire alarm and detection systems. So, first thing to show you here, of course, is your 1 hour of health, safety, and welfare credit. And my name's John Farinelli from JC Code and Construction Consultants, and I will be your instructor for this presentation. So, we're going to start with section 907 out of the Building Code volume, which is specifically titled Fire Alarm and Detection Systems. So let's start with talking about some basic requirements. This is 907.1.1 construction documents. Must be of sufficient clarity to indicate the location, nature, and extent of the work proposed, and show in detail that it will conform to the provisions of this code, the Florida Fire Prevention Code, and relevant laws, ordinances, rules, and regulations as determined by the fire code official. Because obviously we are talking about fire alarm systems. And granted, yes, absolutely, building department's going to issue a permit for items such as fire alarms and all that good stuff. But obviously the fire official is going to get a piece of the action too. Now, as far as the shop drawings, this comes out of 907.1.2. They must be prepared in accordance with NFPA 72 and approved prior to system installation. And when we talk about NFPA 72, that is the National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code. And the 8th edition of the Florida Building Code building volume references the 2019 edition of NFPA 72. Now, when you look at NFPA 72 under section 7.4.4, it's very clear about what needs to be included on the fire alarm system shop drawings. Number one, name of protected premises owner and occupant where applicable. Number two, name of installer or contractor. Number three, location of protected premises. Number four, device legend and symbols in accordance with NFPA 170 or other symbols acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction. And number five, date of issue and any revision dates. Now, there's another laundry list of additional requirements. 7.4.5 floor plan drawings. 7.4.6 system riser diagram. 7.4.7 control unit diagram. 7.4.8 typical wiring diagram. 7.4.9 narrative description, and 7.4.10 system calculation. And we've all seen drawings that were done by fire protection engineers. They're quite comprehensive, very detailed, very detailed. All right, let's go now to the code and we'll take a look at section 105, permits. Now, this section has been changed over the last couple of code cycles. So it's important that we get an up-to-date review of what's going on per FBC 105.3.1.2. No permit may be issued for any building or building construction, erection, alteration, modification, repair, or addition unless the applicant for such permit provides to the enforcing agency which issues the permit, any of the following documents which apply to the construction for which the permit is to be issued, and which shall be prepared by or under the direction of an engineer registered under Chapter 471 Florida statutes. And this is item number 4. Any specialized mechanical, electrical, or plumbing document for any new building or addition, which includes a medical gas, oxygen, steam, vacuum, toxic air filtration, halon, or fire detection and alarm system, which costs more than $5,000. So that is pretty much it in a nutshell there. If the system is valued at more than $5,000, it has to be designed by a Florida registered engineer. Other than that, an alarm contractor can do it. Absolutely. But that's your threshold right there. Now, of course, there is an exception here, and this exception was put in by the legislature. Now, and Pedro's asking, is it just an engineer required or a registered licensed professional? Well, again, Pedro, let's go back and look at the language because I want to make sure you're clear for this. Look what it says. No permit may be issued for any building construction, erection, alteration, modification, repair, or addition unless the applicant for such permit provides to the enforcing agency which issues the permit any of the following documents which apply to the construction for which the permit is to be issued and which shall be prepared by or under the direction of an engineer registered under Chapter 471 Florida statutes. And then specifically when you look at number 4, it includes fire alarm or detection. Costs more than $5,000. So yeah, engineer. Engineer. All right. Now, as I was saying, this exception was put into the code by the legislature. They titled this the Simplified Permitting Process for Fire Alarm System Projects. 1. As used in this section, the term a contractor means a person who is qualified to engage in the business of electrical or alarm system contracting pursuant to a certificate or registration issued by the department under Part 2 of Chapter 489 Florida statutes. Now, Part 2 of 489, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Electrical Contractors Licensing Board. Right there. Fire alarm system project means a fire alarm system alteration of a total of 20 or fewer initiating devices and notification devices, or the installation or replacement of a fire communicator connected to an existing fire alarm control panel in an existing commercial, residential, apartment, cooperative, or condominium building. 2A. A local enforcement agency may require a contractor, as a condition of obtaining a permit for a fire alarm system project, to submit a completed application and payment. B. A local enforcement agency may not require a contractor to submit plans or specifications as a condition of obtaining a permit for a fire alarm system project. 3. A local enforcement agency must issue a permit for a fire alarm system project in person or electronically. 4. A local enforcement agency must require at least one inspection of a fire alarm system project to ensure compliance with applicable codes and standards. If a fire alarm system project fails an inspection, the contractor must take corrective action as necessary to pass inspection. 5. A contractor must keep a copy of the plans and specifications at a fire alarm system project worksite and make such plans and specifications available to the inspector at each inspection. Now, before we go here, excuse me a moment, let me get some water. Sorry about that, little dry in the throat. Now, remember that that is the streamlined process for fire alarm systems, where a contractor can do it all, but it's limited to 20 initiating devices in an existing building. Okay? Existing building. Now, the legislature also made a change here to section 105.17, streamlined low voltage alarm system installation permitting. B, low voltage alarm system project means a project related to the installation, maintenance, inspection, replacement, or service of a new or existing alarm system as defined in 49.505 Florida statutes, including video cameras, closed circuit television systems used to signal or detect a burglary, fire, robbery, or medical emergency that is hardwired and operating at low voltage, as defined in the National Electrical Code Standard 70, current edition, or as a new or existing low voltage electric fence. The term also includes ancillary components or equipment attached to a low voltage alarm system or low voltage electric fence, including but not limited to home automation equipment, thermostats, closed circuit television systems, access controls, battery recharging devices, and video cameras. So again, that is a separate section tied into streamlined low voltage alarm system permitting. And again, this is all put into the code, ladies and gentlemen, by the legislature. All right, that pretty much takes care of the permitting requirements and such, and the specification for when a system must be designed by a registered engineer. So, need to go back to the code, take a look at section 907 here, because of course the accessibility code ties into it. Okay, take a look at 907.1.4 accessibility. Every required fire alarm system shall include a visible alarm indicating appliance in public and common areas. For more specific accessibility requirements related to alarm indicating appliances, refer to the applicable sections of the Florida Building Code accessibility. So, right there out of the gate, the building code volume in short, sweet, concise language sends you right to the accessibility code for provisions of a fire alarm system and what makes them accessible. So, question to the group here, right out of the gate, out of the top of your head, what do you think is the big issue here when it comes to accessibility for fire alarm systems? What do you think it is? Anybody? There we go. Yep. Juan's on it. Retrains, melody, seeing and being able to hear. Yep. Pull stations, retrains. Yeah, pretty much everybody's just about on that. Yeah. And Renee's asking, are there additional specific requirements for fire alarms for buildings occupied by mentally disabled people? Autism, Down syndrome, things like that. No, ma'am, there is not. No, ma'am, there is not. All right, everybody's pretty much right on the money here as far as the provisions in the accessibility code. That's a beautiful thing. And let's take a look. Here's Florida Building Code Accessibility 702. Not a lot in the code, but you're right on the money though. 702.1 General. Fire alarm systems shall have permanently installed audible and visible alarms complying with NFPA 72, the 1999 or 2002 edition, incorporated by reference, blah, 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 except that the maximum allowable sound level of audible notification appliances complying with Section 4-3.2.1 of NFPA 72, 1990 edition, shall have a sound level no more than 110 decibels at the minimum hearing distance from the audible appliance. In addition, alarms in guest rooms required to provide communication features shall comply with sections 4.3 and 4.4 of NFPA 72, 1999 edition, or sections 7.4 and 7.5 of NFPA 72, 2002 edition. Exception. Fire alarm systems and medical care facilities shall be permitted to be provided in accordance with industry practice. And the big deal with that, medical care facilities, is that you really don't want an audible fire alarm going off in a medical care facility, such as a hospital or a nursing home or something like that. There's provisions in section 903 of the building code volume that talk about notification being a visual notification at a current or at a constantly attended location, like a nurse's station. You just have a light panel that notifies that something's going on. Because you know what would happen. You certainly don't want a fire alarm going off in a medical care facility like that. And ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much all the accessibility code has to talk about. Okay? That's really all it really says specifically. All right. And Jeff is saying, was not the Halon system discontinued? There's still some vague references in the code to it, but you don't really see a lot of Halon systems anymore. All right, now, there's something else when it comes under the accessibility code provisions. And you all are right on the money when you mentioned the reach ranges, because fire alarm pull stations are considered an operable part. Here's the definition. A component of an element used to insert, activate, or adjust the element. And then when you look at 309.3, height, operable parts shall be placed within one or more of the reach ranges specified in 308. Now, as we said, in addition to the NFPA 72 requirements, okay, come on, computer. In addition to the NFPA 72 requirements for both audible and visual alarms, devices such as the fire alarm pull stations must be located within the reach ranges specified in the Florida Building Code Accessibility Code volume, as they meet the definition of an operable part. Yeah. And for those of you that were just in the recreational boating facilities class, you've seen all of this. It is considered an operable part. 308.2.1, unobstructed. Where a forward reach is unobstructed, the high forward reach shall be 48 inches maximum, and the low forward reach shall be 15 inches minimum above the finished floor or ground. Now, of course, when we're talking about a fire alarm pull station, I think everybody would agree that it'd be more beneficial to have it a little bit higher up here than something like a receptacle, okay? And of course, excuse me, to make sure that the operable part of that pull station falls within the dimension, I always tell contractors, measure your device box to the top. That way you're guaranteed that that pull station itself will be within the reach ranges. Okay. All right, Antonio wants to back up the truck a little bit here. We talked about the section under 105.3.1.2 where it says the contractor doesn't have to submit plans, but they do have to keep the plans on site. Well, in essence, the intent of the legislature was make it a lot easier, quicker, faster for the contractor to get their permit for the fire alarm system. So all the contractor has to do is submit an application and pay the fee. Everything else is done in the field. Everything. The specs, manufacturer's installation, any drawings, if any. It's just done in the field. Simple as that. All right, and then we have the obstructed high reach, where a height stand beneath the element for a distance not less than the required reach depth over the obstruction. The high forward reach shall be 48 inches maximum, where the reach depth is 20 inches maximum. Where the reach depth exceeds 20 inches, the high forward reach shall be 44 inches maximum, and the reach depth shall be 25 inches maximum. And then we get to the side reach. 308.3.1 is unobstructed. Where a clear floor or ground space allows a parallel approach to an element and the side reach is unobstructed, the high side reach shall be 48 inches maximum and the low side reach shall be 15 inches minimum above the finished floor or ground. And then two exceptions. An obstruction shall be permitted between the clear floor or ground space and the element where the depth of the obstruction is 10 inches maximum. Because again, that doesn't really interfere with how high a person can reach up or down. And then, of course, operable parts of fuel dispensers, they're permitted to be 54 inches maximum, measured from the surface of the vehicular way where the fuel dispensers are installed on existing curbs. And then the obstructed high reach, 308.3.2, where clear floor or ground space allows a parallel approach to an element, and the high side reaches over an obstruction. The height of the obstruction shall be 34 inches high maximum, and the depth of the obstruction shall be 24 inches maximum. The high side reach shall be 48 inches maximum for a reach depth of 10 inches maximum. Where the reach depth exceeds 10 inches, the high side reach shall be 46 inches maximum for a reach depth of 24 inches maximum. Now we do have two exceptions for washing machines, and then again, the operable parts of fuel dispensers. And we've all seen these graphics. 48 inches max for a reach depth of 10 inches, and then 46 max for a reach depth of 24 inches maximum. That's about right. All right. So let's go back to 907 now, and we'll get right back into where they are required. Here's 907.2, new buildings and structures. An approved fire alarm system installed in accordance with the provisions of this code and NFPA 72 shall be provided in new buildings and structures in accordance with sections 907.2.1 through 907.2.23 and provide occupant notification in accordance with section 907.5 unless other requirements are provided by another section of this code. So as you can see, it's rather extensive. Right out of the gate, you've got 22 issues, 22 items to deal with. Not fewer than one manual fire alarm box shall be provided in an approved location to initiate a fire alarm signal for fire alarm systems employing automatic fire detectors or water flow detection devices. Where other sections of this code allow elimination of fire alarm boxes due to sprinklers, a single fire alarm box shall be installed. So for the most part, as you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, you're really looking at having at least one pull station. But again, there are exceptions even to that. Take a look. 1. The manual fire alarm box is not required for fire alarm systems dedicated to elevator recall control and supervisory service. 2. The manual fire alarm box is not required for Group R2 occupancies, unless required by the fire code official to provide a means for fire watch personnel to initiate an alarm during a sprinkler system impairment event. Where provided, the manual fire alarm box shall not be located in an area that is accessible to the public. All right, let's talk a couple of minutes, okay? Specifically, let's look a little bit deeper into number 2 here, okay? And where this is all coming from. It references a sprinkler system impairment event. All right. Let's say you have a group R2 apartment building or a condo, whatever. And of course, it's going to have an NFPA 13 automatic sprinkler system in it. Well, the code and the standards say that when that sprinkler system is inoperable, either because it's being serviced or it's being repaired or whatever's happening to render that system inoperable, the fire code official has the authority to initiate a fire watch, which means they're going to send a firefighter over there and he's going to be there 24/7, as long as it takes for them to complete the work on that fire sprinkler system. And his entire job, if you will, is to stand by that pull station, to be around the area of that pull station. So if an event happens, he can initiate the alarm. Because obviously, if the sprinkler system is down, it's not going to go off. It's not going to trip the flow switch to initiate the alarm on itself. That is the whole point and parcel of exception number 2. And Antonio is asking, well, this is a little off target, but we can answer it. Are car charging stations required to be accessible similar to fuel pumping stations? And the answer to that, Antonio, is yes. The DOJ has already chimed in on that, and according to the Department of Justice, electric vehicle charging stations are fuel for electric vehicles, and therefore they need to meet the provisions for accessibility. All right, let's go now and get a little more specific about where fire alarm systems are required. Here's 907.2.1, Group A. A manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with section 907.5 shall be installed in Group A occupancies where the occupant load due to the assembly occupancy is 300 or more, or where the occupant load is more than 100 persons above or below the lowest level of exit discharge. Group A occupancies not separated from one another in accordance with section 707.3.10 shall be considered a single occupancy for the purpose of applying this section. Portions of Group B occupancies occupied for assembly purposes shall be provided with a fire alarm system as required for a Group E occupancy. And of course, we got an exception. Manual fire alarm boxes are not required where the building is equipped throughout with an automatic sprinkler system installed in accordance with section 903.3.1.1, and the occupant notification appliances will activate throughout the notification zones upon sprinkler water flow. All right, couple of things to talk about here. Okay. First off, as you can see, when we start talking about where fire alarms are required based on the occupancy group, it's based on the occupant load. Contrast that with the requirements for an automatic sprinkler system. That is generally based upon the square foot area of the facility. That's really the difference. Occupant load versus square foot area. Now, that said, there's a couple of other things going on here when it comes to your Group A's. This is 907.2.1.1. System initiation in Group A occupancies with an occupant load of 1,000 or more. Activation of the fire alarm in Group A occupancies with an occupant load of 1,000 or more shall initiate a signal using an emergency voice alarm communication system in accordance with Section 907.5.2.2. Exception. Where approved, the pre-recorded announcement is allowed to be manually deactivated for a period of time, not to exceed 3 minutes, for the sole purpose of allowing a live voice announcement from an approved, constantly attended location. So there's your magic number. 1,000 or more occupants in a Group A emergency voice alarm communication system. All right. Now going to Group B, 907.2.2. A manual fire alarm system which activates the occupant notification system in accordance with Section 907.5 shall be installed in Group B occupancies where one of the following conditions exist. 1. The combined Group B occupant load of all floors is 500 or more. 2. The Group B occupant load is more than 100 persons above or below the lowest level of exit discharge. 3. The fire area contains an ambulatory care facility. Now, there is one exception to this, okay? Before we go there, I want to mention this. Code is very, very clear about when a manual fire alarm system has to be installed in a Group B. But contrast that with the requirement for an automatic sprinkler system in a Group B. The only instances where you need an automatic fire sprinkler system in a Group B is when it's a high rise or ambulatory care. Ambulatory care. Now, that said, take a look at the exception. Listen to this. Manual fire alarm boxes are not required where the building is equipped, excuse me, throughout with an automatic sprinkler system installed in accordance with Section 903.3.1.1. And the occupant notification appliances will activate throughout the notification zones upon sprinkler water flow. So right there out of the gate, if you have a NFPA 13 system, okay, and you've got occupant notification, you don't even really have to have a manual fire alarm box. And here is the specific on ambulatory care, 907.2.2.1. Fire areas containing ambulatory care facilities shall be provided with an electronically supervised automatic smoke detection system installed within the ambulatory care facility and in public use areas outside of tenant spaces, including public corridors and elevator lobbies. Exception. Building is equipped throughout with an automatic sprinkler system in accordance with Section 903.3.1.1, provided the occupant notification appliances will activate throughout the notification zones upon sprinkler water flow. Well, again, it's the same exception that you just saw a second ago when it was talking about, again, ambulatory care facilities. So we are good. All right. So Orga is asking, the number 2 references the occupant load on a floor immediately above or below or the total. Well, again, it's always above or below the level of exit discharge. Take a look. There's number 2 again. More than 100 persons above or below the level of exit discharge. It's not a total. All right. Going to Group E now. 907.2.3. A manual fire alarm system that initiates the occupant notification signal utilizing an emergency voice alarm communication system, meeting the requirements of Section 907.5.2.2 and installed in accordance with Section 907.6 shall be installed in Group E occupancies. When automatic sprinkler systems or smoke detectors are installed, such systems or detectors shall be connected to the building fire alarm system. Now, that's a pretty wide open blanket statement there. Okay. But there are four exceptions to when a fire alarm is not required in a Group E. And the first exception right out of the gate says that if you have a Group E occupancy with an occupant load of 50 or less, you don't have to have a manual fire alarm. Next item states that the emergency voice alarm communication system, okay, is not required in a Group E with an occupant load of 100 or less, provided that the activation of the manual fire alarm system initiates an approved occupant notification signal. Number three, you don't have to have manual fire alarm boxes in a Group E where the interior corridors are protected by smoke detectors. Auditoriums, cafeterias, gymnasiums, and similar areas are protected by heat detectors or other approved detection devices. And shops and laboratories involving dust vapors are protected by heat detectors or other approved detection devices. And finally, in a Group E, you don't have to have manual fire alarm boxes if the building is equipped throughout with an approved automatic sprinkler system, again, an NFPA 13 system. And you've got emergency voice alarm communication system, and manual activation is provided from normally occupied location. So you've got four exceptions. Now, for your Group F, a manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with Section 907.5 shall be installed in Group F occupancies where both of the following conditions exist. One, the Group F occupancy is 2 or more stories in height. Two, the Group F occupancy has a combined occupant load of 500 or more above or below the level of exit discharge. And there is one exception, and it states that manual fire alarm boxes are not required when the building is equipped throughout with an automatic sprinkler system, NFPA 13, and the occupant notification appliances activate throughout the notification zone upon sprinkler water flow. And Renee is asking if the building is a mixed occupancy with E on the first floor and B on the second floor, which rules apply? Well, Renee, that depends. How did you design it? Did you design it as separated or non-separated? If you designed it as separated, what is table 508.4? If it's separated, and if I remember correctly, I think you're going to need 2 hours. So if you provide a 2-hour fire barrier or a 2-hour firewall or a 2-hour horizontal rated assembly between the two occupancies, all you're going to have to do is sprinkle the Group E. If you design it as non-separated, which means no fire separation between the occupancies, you're going to have to install it throughout the entire building. Okay? Existing non-separated. Okay, Renee, thanks for telling me right out of the gate. You threw me a curve there. If it's existing, it's a different animal. Now you have to go to the existing building code volume in the fire prevention code for a building of an existing occupancy. That's totally different animal than new construction. And there's too many variables there, so I can't really give you anything concrete. All right, and John is asking, is there anything in the works for fire alarm or protection for multiple electric vehicle charging stations in multi-unit residential garages? Nope, haven't heard anything along those lines yet, John. Although we all know what kind of issues we've got for lithium-ion batteries with fire potential and such, but I'm not aware of anything coming down the pike yet. We'll see what happens in the next edition of the code. I would suspect that if anything happens, it'll happen in the Florida Fire Prevention Code. That's my guess. All right. Next up, Group H. I think you know where this is going. An H is a high hazardous occupancy. A manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with section 907.5 shall be installed in group H5 occupancies and in occupancies used for the manufacture of organic coatings. An automatic smoke detection system shall be installed for highly toxic gases, organic peroxides, and oxidizers in accordance with the Florida Fire Prevention Code. Now, as you can see here, this is specific to a group H, which is a semiconductor production facility, and any occupancy used for the manufacture of organic coatings. Everything else goes to the fire prevention code. All right, here is your group I, institutional. A manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with section 907.5 shall be installed in group I occupancies. An automatic smoke detection system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with section 907.5 shall be provided in accordance with sections 907.2.6.1, point 2, and point 3.3. And where would we be in this world without exceptions? And there are two of them. First exception states that manual fire alarm boxes and sleeping units of group I1 and I2 occupancies are not required at exits if located at all care providers' control stations or other constantly attended staff locations, provided such stations are visible and continuously accessible, and that the distances of travel required in 907.42.1 are not exceeded. And the second exception, occupant notification systems are not required to be activated where private mode signaling installed in accordance with NFPA 72 is approved by the fire code official, and staff evacuation responsibilities are included in the fire safety and evacuation plan required by the Florida Fire Prevention Code. And let's see, Carl is asking, so group H1 through H4 do not have any additional requirements beyond what is outlined in the Florida Building Code? And that is pretty much the case there, Carl. I mean, if it's a group H, it's going to have an automatic fire sprinkler system in it. That's guaranteed, cut and dried. It's mandatory. But fire alarms are a little bit different. A little bit different. All right. And Vince, any guidelines for electric wires and colors? That all comes out of NFPA 72 for the shop drawing submittal. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Here is your group I1. In group I1 occupancies, an automatic smoke detection system shall be installed in corridors, waiting areas, open to corridors, and habitable kitchens other than sleeping units and kitchens. Systems shall be activated in accordance with section 907.5. But, of course, two exceptions. First exception is for group I1 condition 1. Smoke detection in habitable space is not required when the building is fully sprinkled, NFPA 13. And you don't have to provide smoke detection for exterior balconies. And then your I2s. Come back here. This is 907.2.6.2. An automatic smoke detection system shall be installed in corridors in group I2 condition 1, facilities and spaces permitted to be open to corridors by section 407.2. System shall be activated in accordance with 907.4. Group I2 condition 2 occupancies shall be equipped with an automatic smoke detection system as required in section 407. And of course, two exceptions, which both come out of here, and they all send you back to 407. And of course, 407 specific to your I2 occupancies. Pretty short and sweet. Group I3 occupancy shall be equipped with a manual fire alarm system and automatic smoke detection system installed for alerting staff. And that's it. There are no exceptions for the I3s. None. Group M, a manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with Section 907.5 shall be installed in Group M occupancies where one of the following conditions exist. 1. The combined Group M occupant load of all floors is 500 or more persons. 2. The Group M occupant load is more than 100 persons above or below the lowest level of exit discharge. And of course, two exceptions. First exception, you do not need a manual fire alarm system in a covered mall or an open mall. And the second exception, well, what do you think that is? Sprinkler systems again. 903.3.1.1, an NFPA 13 system, and the occupant notification goes off in all zones upon sprinkler water flow. That's to be expected. Now take a look. This is specific to Group M. Occupant notification, 907.2.7.1. During times that the building is occupied, the initiation of a signal from a manual fire alarm box or from a water flow switch shall not be required to activate the alarm notification appliances when an alarm signal is activated at a constantly attended location from which evacuation instructions shall be initiated over an emergency voice alarm communication system installed in accordance with Section 907.5.2.2. So clearly there, ladies and gentlemen, it depends on how it's designed. If you have a Group M with a constantly attended location, you can get away with not having a manual fire alarm box. Again, it just depends on how you design it. Now, when we go to 907.2.8 Group R1s, well, this is pretty straightforward. Fire alarm systems and smoke alarms shall be installed in Group R1 occupancies as required in sections 907.2.8.1 through 8.3. And when you go to the first subsection, it says a manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with 907.5 shall be installed in a Group R1 occupancy. But once again, where would we be about exceptions? You got two of them. You do not need a manual fire alarm in a Group R1 as long as the building is not more than 2 stories in height and all the individuals sleeping in units and contiguous attic and crawl spaces to those units are separated from each other and public or common use areas by not less than 1 hour fire partitions. And each individual sleeping unit has an exit directly to a public way, egress corridor yard. So, in essence, okay, very, very specific. You'd have to have like exterior balconies and thing, or an exterior egress balcony in order to invoke exception number 1. But exception number 2 states that you don't need manual fire alarm boxes either when building is equipped with an automatic sprinkler system, either an NFPA 1 or excuse me, an NFPA 13 or an NFPA 13R. And you've got sprinkler flow switches in there. And you've got at least one manual fire alarm box in an approved location. Other than that, you're good to go. But when we talk about Group R, you got to worry about automatic smoke detection too. An automatic smoke detection system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with Section 907.5 shall be installed throughout all interior corridors, interior serving sleeping units. The exception, though, an automatic smoke detection system is not required in buildings that do not have interior corridors serving sleeping units and where each sleeping unit has the means of egress door opening directly to an exit or to an exterior exit access that leads directly to an exit. And let's see, Richard is asking, are water mist fire suppression systems addressed in the code? Well, Richard, NFPA looks at 4 different types of water-filled sprinkler systems. I don't think a water mist fire suppression system is compliant with the requirements for an NFPA 13 system. That would probably be something more suitable for residential. And again, the code is very, very specific about the NFPA 13, the 13R, which can be used in residential buildings up to and including 4 floors, and the NFPA 13, which is for dwelling units. So, when we talk about wet sprinkler systems, there's filled water systems, dry systems, pre-action, and deluge. So I don't think a mist system is going to fall into any of those categories, at least from what I'm thinking of right now. All right. Now here's your R2s. Fire alarm systems and smoke alarms shall be installed in Group R2 occupancies as required in sections 907.2.9.1 through 907.2.9.3. And here's your manual fire alarm system. A manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with 907.5 shall be installed in Group R2 occupancies where any of the following conditions apply. 1. Any dwelling unit or sleeping unit is located 3 or more stories above the lowest level of exit discharge. 2. Any dwelling unit or sleeping unit is located more than 1 story below the highest level of exit discharge or exit serving the dwelling unit or sleeping unit. 3. The building contains more than 16 dwelling units or sleeping units. All right. And Jorge's asking where registered engineer designs are required. Once the fire alarm system is installed and as-bills provided, are the shop drawings and the design drawings required to be reconciled per the ad-bill? Yes. Everything has to be per plan. If you've revised it or whatever you've done with it, as-bills have to be submitted. It's a revision. Everything has to be per plan. Now, as far as the R2s, just keep in mind that you've got 3 exceptions of that. The code also specifically addresses R2 college and university buildings. An automatic smoke detection system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with section 907.5 shall be installed in Group R2 occupancies operated by a college or university for student or staff housing in all of the following locations. Common spaces outside of the dwelling units and sleeping units, laundry rooms, mechanical equipment rooms, and storage rooms, all interior corridors serving sleeping units or dwelling units. But then you get a major exception here. An automatic smoke detection system is not required in buildings that do not have interior corridors serving sleeping units or dwelling units, and where each sleeping unit or dwelling unit either has a means of egress door opening directly to an exterior exit access that leads directly to an exit or a means of egress door opening directly to an exit. And that's exactly what you saw a moment ago with similar provisions for your R1s. Required smoke alarms in dwelling units and sleeping units and R2 occupancies operated by a college or university for student or staff housing shall be interconnected with the fire alarm system in accordance with NFPA 72. And let's see, Arnold, what about a church sanctuary existing building rebuilt because of fire? That's too much of an open-ended question. There's too many variables there. Okay, there's not nothing I can really talk to you about there. At least not in the time frame we have left. All right, wrapping this puppy up. We have got RF4s. Fire alarms and smoke alarms shall be installed in Group R4 occupancies as required in sections 907.2.10.1 through 10.3. And here's point one. A manual fire alarm system that activates the occupant notification system in accordance with section 907.5 shall be installed in Group R4 occupancies. And there are three exceptions to that. And that's going to do it for us, ladies and gentlemen. We have completed the presentation on fire alarms. Thought we had some pretty good conversation there. Greatly appreciate greatly appreciate that. It's always good to have some good conversation. All right, Crystal, I'll hand it back to you while I am prepping for the next presentation.
Great. Well, thank you, John, for another great presentation. We will go on just a quick stretch break and start again at 1:05. So if you'd like to join us on the last presentation, which will get you that Florida Building Code credit, it's on window installation. Please just stay logged in. So as long as you can see John's screen and hear our voices at 1:05, then you are set to go. So we will come back on in 4 minutes. And that looks great, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, John, I have 105. Are you all good?
Yes, ma'am. Ready to go, Gophers.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We'll go ahead and start the third presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good to have you back with us real quick here. Now, our next presentation is a 1 hour advanced course, and it comes out of the 8th edition of the Residential Code. And we're going to look at the FMA AAMA 200 window installation provisions. This document, it is a reference standard. It comes from the Fenestration Manufacturers Association, who worked in conjunction with the American Architectural Manufacturers Association to produce this reference standard. So, credits across the board here for everyone. This will give you your health and welfare credit as an advanced course for AIA. And once again, I am John Farinelli from JC Code and Construction, and I will be your instructor for this course. So, as we said, we are going to give you an overview of the FMA AAMA window and door, or excuse me, window and flashing installation requirements as referenced in Chapter 7 of the Building Code volume. Now, that said, right out of the gate, there are similar provisions in the Building Code volume in Chapter 14. So don't think this is just limited to the residential code. It is not. It is not. Provisions are a little bit different, but the end result is still the same. All right. We'll start with the 8th edition of the residential code. Section R 703, exterior covering. General charging section 703.1. Exterior walls shall provide the building with a water-resistant exterior wall envelope. The exterior wall envelope shall include flashing as described in section R 703.4. Now, first things first, look at the language. The exterior wall envelope shall include flashing. It says shall. It doesn't say if you think it's a good idea. It doesn't say that if it's convenient. It doesn't say if you're in the mood. It says shall. End of story. You know, the code for the last, I don't know how many code cycles, is always trying to make improvements to protect buildings, both residential and commercial, from water penetration into the structure. So we do have an exception for log walls designed and constructed in accordance with the provisions of the ICC 400. And the reason why that exception is in there is the ICC 400 is for the design and construction of log homes. And that standard in and of itself has provisions in there for water penetration protection, as well as energy code provisions. It's a complete reference standard for the design and construction of log homes. Now, moving forward to 703.4 flashing. Approved corrosion-resistant flashing shall be applied shingle fashion in a manner to prevent entry of water into the wall cavity or penetration of water to the building structural framing components. And that section goes on ad nauseum. Approved corrosion-resistant flashing shall be installed at the following locations. 1. Exterior window and door openings. Flashing at exterior window and door openings shall extend to the surface of the exterior wall finish or to the water-resistive barrier, complying with section 703.2 for subsequent drainage. Mechanically attached flexible flashing shall comply with AMA 712. Flashing at exterior window and door openings shall be installed in accordance with one or more of the following. All right, we got to stop right there for a second. First off, okay, where it talks about extending to the surface of the exterior wall finish. That is a reference, if you will, to masonry construction. Okay. But when it talks about extending to the water resistive barrier, that's frame construction. So this section clearly covers both bases, masonry and frame construction. Now, when you see that reference to the AMA 712, that is the voluntary specification for mechanically attached flexible flashing. All right. Now, when you look at that last sentence once again, installed in accordance with one or more of the following. This is where you get your laundry list. Okay. And the one that we are mostly concerned about in this presentation, and I guess before we go there, I should talk about or answer Antonio's question. Is R703.1 applicable to existing buildings where windows are being replaced? Well, again, it depends. If the window is being replaced because it was damaged, then it's a repair under Chapter 4 of the existing building code volume, and you could pretty much put it back the way it was. Uh, would it be a good idea to flash it? The answer is yes. Now, if it wasn't a repair and it was a level 1 alteration, then you're going to have to comply with the code provisions for new work. And therefore, yes, it would have to be flashed. Absolutely. All right, now looking at this section. This is 703.4 flashing. 1.1. The fenestration manufacturer's installation and flashing instructions, or for applications not addressed in the fenestration manufacturer's instructions, in accordance with the flashing or water-resistive barrier manufacturer's instructions. Where flashing instructions or details are not provided, pan flashing shall be installed at the sill of exterior window and door openings. Pan flashing shall be sealed or sloped in such a manner as to direct water to the surface of the exterior wall finish or to the water-resistive barrier for subsequent drainage. Openings using pan flashing shall incorporate flashings or protection at the head and the sides. All right, well, pan flashing is nothing new. It's a metal pan, or it can be a flexible material. It's turned up on three sides, sloped to the exterior. So if any water does get in around the unit, it drains it out. Now that's 1.1. But take a look at the rest of the story here. 1.2. In accordance with the flashing design or method of a registered design professional. 1.3. In accordance with other approved materials. But look, we have a Florida-specific amendment in accordance with the FMA AMA 100, 200, 250, 300, 400, or 2710. And again, that is not in the international codes. That is a Florida thing, referencing these FMA AMA standards. And as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. Well, take a look a little closer. Here's the FMA 100, windows and wood frame construction. Here's the 200 that we're going to deal with, the windows and masonry construction. The 250 is non-frontal flange windows with mounting flanges. The 300 is exterior doors, wood frame construction. The 400 is exterior doors and masonry construction. And here, the 2710, full frame replacement of windows without removal of external brick veneer. That's new to the 8th edition of the code. That was just put in this code cycle. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, the FMA AMA standards pretty much cover the gamut. Windows and wood frame and masonry construction, non-frontal flange windows, if we got flanges, exterior doors, wood frame, masonry, and so on. Been around a while. All right, so let's get into the standard. This is the FMA AMA 200 2012 edition. It is titled The Standard Practice for the Installation of Windows with Frontal Flanges for Surface Barrier Masonry Construction for Extreme Wind and Water Conditions. And as we said, it is the 2012 edition that we're still using. Now, when you look at the format of the standard, one is scope, two is reference documents, three is definitions, four is significance and use, five related issues and procedures, six window installation procedures, seven post installation procedures, and eight covers your keywords. Now, there is a very informative introduction to the standard. Includes a procedure for the installation of windows with frontal flanges into buildings with surface barrier wall construction, masonry or concrete, with a height of no more than 3 stories. Wood frame construction is not included. As you saw, there was a separate standard for that. Detailed instructions for wood frame construction when used on second and third floor construction of a masonry building are covered in the FMA 100 wood frame. Now, the reason why it tells you clear as a bell here, concrete masonry with a height of no more than 3 stories. That's because the higher you go up in a building, the higher the design pressures are. And the testing under this standard for water penetration around the unit was limited. Now, that's not to say that you can't use this method on higher openings. You can. You can. It just wasn't tested to those provisions. All right, moving on. The techniques have been developed specifically to restrict liquid water from entering through the masonry opening and or around the perimeter of the window frame. The major emphasis is focused on sealing the surrounding area of the window's masonry opening in such a manner to restrict liquid water from penetrating the wall at the window opening. The standard presumes a drainage plane is not present behind the facade. It is a surface barrier system when we talk about masonry construction. Provides details for both the barrier installation, a full perimeter seal at the exterior interface between the window and the wall cavity under the flange, and a drainage installation such that there is a discontinuous seal at the exterior sill interface to allow drainage from a sill pan flashing system. In general, drainage installations should be utilized for systems that are susceptible to high moisture exposure, moisture-sensitive materials, and potential leakage around the interface. It is essential that a robust air-water seal around the interior perimeter of the window wall cavity interface is achieved in drainage installations. All right, let's talk about that for a second. When we talk about systems that are susceptible to high moisture exposure, that would be your higher end windows, if you will, that are made out of wood, mahogany, oak, things like that. When we talk about that air water seal around the interior, well, you're going to see here that in the standard, it describes and specifies how the air and water seal is put around the window unit on the inside of the wall, the inside face. So that way, if any water does penetrate around the window unit, because you're using a drainage system, it cannot come back into the structure. It has no choice but to drain out. So we'll look at that a little bit deeper here shortly. Scope. This standard covers the installation of frontal flange windows into buildings with a surface barrier wall construction, masonry or concrete, of no more than 3 stories in height. To simulate extreme exposure conditions and demonstrate the effectiveness of this standard practice, representative methods described in this practice have been water tested up to and including a water test pressure of 575 pascals, 12 pounds per square foot, using the ASTM E331 water test. All right, let's talk about that for a second. We all know that under the code, be it building code volume or residential code volume, that your windows and doors have to meet the opening design pressures. But the code also talks about limiting water penetration. And when we test for water penetration resistance, the product is tested at about 1/3 of the opening design pressures. That's where that 12 pounds per square foot comes from. And again, what they're testing is for water penetration around the window unit itself, not the window itself. Okay? Around the perimeter of the window unit. 1.3. This practice applies to frontal flange windows which employ an integral or applied flange that is attached and sealed to the window perimeter frame and is designed as an appendage that will cover a previously installed buck and/or integral with a precast sill. 1.7. Although an exterior sealant joint is used in this application, the interior seal shall be considered the primary sealant joint, which will create both an air and water seal. Now, under 1.7 here, well, in fact, let's go back to 1.3. You're going to see here that the standard will allow you to use a poured up bottom sill or a precast sill. Either way. Either way. Or you can use a buck on all 4 sides. Now, the exterior joint sealant, what they're talking about there is generally, and what we've done for 100 years, is you run a bead of sealant around the exterior of the window frame where it butts the stucco. That's what they're talking about there. But they really hang their hat upon the interior seal. Now, we do have some definitions. Air seal. A seal put into the air gap area around the interior side, exterior side, or both sides of the window perimeter to restrict infiltration or exfiltration or air past the window. Flashing. Water-resistant material that bridges the joint between the window frame and the adjacent construction to prevent water penetration. Now, notice in that definition of flashing, it doesn't say anything about what type of material. It doesn't say that it's metal. It doesn't say that it's flexible. Of those are acceptable. Frontal flange refers to a type of window which includes a permanent appendage projecting parallel to the plane of the wall, located at or near the exterior surface of the window for the purpose of installing the window against a backstop, buck, receptor, or other such step features that have been incorporated into the rough opening. Liquid applied flashing, a material that is fluid at the time of application that provides a water-resistive seal around building openings at or near the interface between the through-wall penetration, the window, and the building envelope, and meets the performance requirements of AMA 714. And that is your specification for liquid applied flashing. And I think you would agree that at this point, from what we've seen here, those flexible flashings are used mainly for wood frame construction, although they can be used for masonry. But it's the liquid that we're going to concentrate on here. Here's the definition of your pan flashing or sill pan. A type of flashing used at the base of a rough opening to divert water to the exterior or to the exterior surface of a concealed water-resistant barrier. Pan flashings have upturned legs at the rear interior edge, the back dam, and right and left sides, the end dams, to form a three-sided pan that has the front open for drainage. They are intended to collect and drain water towards the exterior, including water that may enter through the window unit or around the window between the rough opening and the fenestration. And as we said, pan flashing can be made from self-adhered flashing material or from rigid or semi-rigid materials such as metal or a semi-rigid polymer. There's different ways to do the pan flashing. Precast window sill. A product used at the sill of a window masonry opening designed with a slope for the purpose of draining water away from the window masonry opening to the exterior of the building, and then sealant. Any variety of compounds used to fill and seal joints or openings in wood, metal, masonry, and other materials. For the purposes of this standard practice, sealant shall have the capability of allowing for joint movement and appropriate adhesion as required for construction applications. Notice they define it as a sealant and not caulking. It's a sealant. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. All right, let's get into the window installation procedures under Section 6. First thing out of the gate, you start out with a sow's ear, you can't make a silk purse. You start out with junk, you end up with junk. Pre-installation inspection. Verify that the masonry rough opening meets this standard with regard to being the correct size, square, plumb, and true. Remedy any discrepancies. 6.1.2. Before installation, inspect the masonry opening for missing mortar, cracks in the sill, and any of the defect which has produced a void or allows passage of liquid water through the masonry opening. Remedy any discrepancies. Here's the big dog. 6.2.1 Masonry rough openings. 6.2.1.1 Size and tolerances of masonry openings shall be determined from the window manufacturer's instructions and the standard practice. Look at this. 6.2.1.2 The masonry opening shall be plumb, level, square, and true prior to the installation of the window. No more than 1/4 inch deviation from square, height, and width, and 1/8 deviation from plumb shall be allowed unless specified by the manufacturer's instructions. That's pretty tight tolerances there, folks. But again, you gotta have a good, clean opening. Again, if you start out with junk, you end up with junk. Okay? 6.2.1.3 Verify the correct installation of the precast sill or cast in place sill. Now, we're all familiar with precast sills. The big dog in the business there, of course, is Cascrete. And you'll notice that they have all of it set. You'll notice the step down in the area. It's got the flange, gets caulked or sealed. Don't necessarily have to have fasteners in the bottom. And you'll notice again, this has just got a lip on it, if you will, an overhang versus a straight cut one. 6 of one, half a dozen or the other. It doesn't really matter. But that's your precast sill. And if you want to use those, have at it. Have at it. If not, you can pour up the bottom. All right. Going to the next section now. 6.2.1.4 Treat the masonry opening, including the sill area, with a liquid applied flashing before installation of the buck receptor materials. Ensure that the corner joints are properly sealed. And as you can see in the graphics that are provided in the standard, this intersection of the precast sill at the masonry wall is sealed and the whole area is flashed all the way around. Now, let's talk about this quote sealant. You're going to go through all of this trouble to flash the windows, make sure everything is tight and right, and really do a fine job. And then you're going to use a tube of sealant, otherwise known as caulk, that cost 89 cents. Well, remember, when it comes to sealants, you get what you pay for. You're going to need to use a good quality urethane sealant. And yeah, that's going to run you $6 or $8 a tube, but you get what you pay for. Now, before we move further there, let's talk about the liquid flashing. Okay? You'll see here in this photo that I took from one of the standards. It's a little blue color. But let's get into it. This is from DuPont, Tyvek, fluid applied, flashing brush formulation, residential installation guide for direct applied stucco CMU wall system with frontal flange windows. Notice what it references? The FMA AMA 200. Yep, the FMA AMA 200. Now, let me go ahead and do this because it's the only way I can really show it to you. So bear with me here a second. Oh, come back here now. Don't give me agita. Come on. There we go. All right. Now I cannot tell. Okay, let me try this a different way. I cannot tell if you all can see this. So please share with me. Tell me, can you see what I'm showing you on the screen here? Okay, Pablo's saying he can see it. Everybody else see it okay? Okay, excellent, excellent. All right, now this is what I wanted to show you. Okay, when you look at the technical specs from the manufacturer for this stuff, all right, it gives you this, that, and the other thing, general instructions, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Yes, yes, yes. But this should look familiar. Look at step one. Verify that the masonry rough opening meets the size and tolerance standards, is square, plumb, and true, as specified by the window manufacturer or the FMA AMA standard. Reference or remedy any discrepancy. So they're pretty much doing the same thing that the standard says. And then it goes into the installation of the window buck. Okay? And they're very, very specific. It's the same specs that are in the standard. Okay? They even give you some graphics. Flash behind or seal behind the buck, seal the perimeters, and so on and so forth. Okay? And then they tell you about treating the rough opening in the interior wall face. Now, what's important here? Do not apply. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, there we go. Do not apply fluid applied flashing material on the exterior surface of the wall or in the sill area or rough opening exterior to the window. This is to ensure that the surface applied stucco is directly applied to the concrete masonry block and not the fluid applied flashing. So, clearly you can see they do not want the flashing material applied to the face of the block or this raw edge on the outside of the building. Okay? They only want the flashing behind here and behind the buck itself. They don't want any flashing where you're going to stucco because it could inhibit the bond. Okay? Now, that said, it goes on and talks about the window installation and so on. And again, everything that you see here, ladies and gentlemen, everything that you see here is the manufacturer's specs. And it's also from the AMA. Here's the interior seal and indication with the facade. Same thing, same thing. Now, let me get rid of this one and show you this other one. Because as you saw, the one from DuPont said, don't apply it to the face of the block. But then when you look at this one, this photo look familiar? It's the one I'm showing you in the presentation itself. This is from a different manufacturer. And there's the reference to the AMA 200. Okay, it gives you all the specs on it. But this one, again, they show it all on the outside of the block and such. They even give you a sealant and some flexible flashing. But that's pretty much about it. That's all they give you. It is nowhere near as comprehensive as the one from DuPont. Okay? Now that said, all I'm telling you is this. Check the manufacturer's specs for the product that you're going to use. Okay? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong. I'm not saying that. Check the specs. All right, Antonio, some liquid flashing products require sand application to promote bonding by stucco. I have heard that, Antonio, that they want you to put some sand in there to increase the bond. I have heard that. But again, the bottom line, check with your manufacturer. All right, now let's talk about installation of the buck. Install the window buck, which will act as a mounting surface on both sides and the top for seating of the window into the masonry opening. Key language. Use of multiple bucks shall not be allowed. And we used to see that, boy, the masonry contractor would make the opening too big, or the contractor for the structure decided to put a smaller window in. And so they just stack up two or three 2x4s on one side, or two 2x4s on each side. No, because there's no way you're going to be able to seal that properly. Next, the buck shall be installed in such a fashion that there are no edge gaps exceeding 1/8 inch between the buck and the masonry sill member. They want it tight. If a sill pan subsill is used, the buck shall be cut and coped as required to fit snugly on top of the subsill without causing interference with the end dams. And Eric saying there are also installation details that show stucco lath wrapping around the corner and nailed to the CMU. Yep, that's another way to do it. And Mark Beatty is agreeing with you, apparently, Eric. Better add wire lath over the blue stuff if you want the stucco to stick. There's no testing I know of adding sand to the surface. And I'm with you there, Mark. I've always been an advocate of some stucco accessories there. And we'll talk about that too a little bit here. All right. Now, the next thing you're going to do, prior to installation of the buck, apply liquid applied flashing or sealant to all buck surfaces that will be in direct contact with the masonry roof opening to prevent the passage of liquid water behind the buck. All right. So, clearly, at this point, you've applied the liquid flashing to the masonry block. And now we're running with sealant or flashing applied to the back side of the buck where it's going to be in contact with the masonry unit. And Eric is also asking, doesn't it make more sense to keep the water from getting into the backup CMU? The backup, I'm guessing he's saying back of. It would seem that installing the flashing around the exterior face of the CMU and tying it in with the stucco system would be better. No point in flashing the interior face of the wall. Well, again, depends on the manufacturer, depends how you want to do it. Really, I mean, when you think about that liquid flashing, it's really intended to prevent water penetration at the interface of the window unit in the masonry. Okay, so I myself would not put flashing material on the outside face of the block. I don't think it does any good. Because again, we're trying to stop water from penetrating around the window perimeter. All right, 6.3.3. The exterior face of the buck shall align with the sill material to create a continuous planar mounting surface for the window flange. Anchorage of the bucks per the applicable code. And you know how that works under the residential code. You're going to go through the buck with a masonry screw, minimum, I think it's an inch and a quarter or inch and a half, maybe, into the masonry. Once the bucks have been attached to the masonry, apply a fillet bead of sealant into the perimeter joint and into the joinery between the end of the buck and the masonry sill. Tool the sealant, ensuring continuity between the buck and the sill member with no air or water gaps. And of course, they're not talking about taking your finger and running it around. Use a tool. They make caulking tools specifically for that purpose. And John is asking, has anyone seen a residential window replacement job on masonry stucco where the bucks and the stucco was completely removed and the window installed as new? And yes, John, I have seen that. That is actually the best way to do it. The best way to do it. Ship it all out of there. Do it like it's new. All right, next up, 6.3.3.3. The exposed exterior face of the buck and the return surface of the jambs shall be coated with a liquid applied flashing or self-flashing membrane to restrict the liquid water from penetrating. So now you're going to flash the buck again, the exterior face. But there is one important caveat. The liquid applied or self-adhering flashing shall be compatible to and allow adhesion with the sealant applied to the backside of the flange later. The interior surface of the wood buck shall be unsealed to allow drying to the interior. And Jeff's saying, why did you not define a buck and its material allowed or not? No particular reason, Jeff. Didn't think I had to. I think everybody knows what a wood buck is. And of course, some of your product approval for your windows, a wood buck is optional. Yeah, pretty much that covered it. All right. Now that we've put the bucks in, sealed and flashed everything, it's time to stuff the window in the hole. 6.4.1 and 4.2. Inspect and clean the buck and sill areas in the interior surface of the exterior window flange. Run a 3/8 inch nominal diameter bead of sealant up both jamb sides and across the head of the interior face of the window flange. Connect that bead of sealant across any joinery on the window frame at all four corners. Alternately, sealant can be applied to the exterior edge of the buck. Now, if you're doing a drainage method, you apply a discontinuous bead of the sealant on the interior surface of the flange at the sill or the exterior edge of the buck. And basically, you're going to leave a 2-inch gap in two places. Two places. Any exterior finish applied to the sill shall not interfere with the drainage of liquid water. That's your drainage method. You're going to make sure that your stucco contractor doesn't block the drainage area or your painter either when he comes back. It recalks around there. Barrier installation methods shall apply a continuous bead of sealant on all four sides of the interior surface of the flange or exterior edge of the buck. Next up, stuffing the window in the hole. Here's some good advice. Place the window into the opening. Check that the window is plumb, level, square, and true. Install shims in a manner that will not interfere with the application of the interior air seal. And generally, per the product approvals and the windows that I've seen for the last I don't know how many years, your maximum shim thickness is 1/4 of an inch. I have seen some windows that came from Germany that did have product approval, and they were wood, but they were looking at a 3/8 inch maximum. But that's the only time I've ever seen that. All right, next, install fasteners to secure the window in place based upon the manufacturer's instructions per the applicable code. Product approval. Whatever the product approval says to anchor the unit against the wind loads, and of course, if it's impact rated. Yep. And John Foster's saying when you shim that puppy up, you can't use cedar shims. Yeah, they compress too easy. Really can't use those. Not anymore, anyway. All right, now, because you've applied a generous bead of sealant to the back side of the flange, when you push it up against that buck, it's going to ooze out of there. Note 6.8.4. From the exterior, tool the squeezed out portion of the sealant flat over the wood buck, ensuring that there is no interference with the installation of the cladding or the stucco. If the buck is still exposed on the exterior side, sealant shall be reapplied and then tooled over the wood. And that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to make damn good and sure that that flange is sealed against the buck. Absolutely. And then we deal with the outside. But first, we're going to do the interior side because now we have to worry about the air and water seal, right? On the interior side, apply a backer rod and a continuous interior perimeter bead of sealant or aerosol foam sealant without backer rod or other approved material between the window and the buck. And that's on the inside, okay? And we've all seen problems with using the wrong kind of foam that expands too much. We all know that they make a specific window and door sealant spray foam that is minimal expanding, and that can be used around the perimeter on the inside. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a best practice for the outside, the exterior perimeter. Because generally, what we've done is we've just stuccoed up to the frame on the outside and run a bead of caulk, for lack of a better term, around the outside perimeter. But there is an actual best practice that you may want to look at. To properly assemble a wall cladding system using stucco or manufactured stone veneer, the best practice is to maintain a gap around door and window openings and install a backer rod with a compatible sealant in order to keep moisture out. The use of a bead with an integral backer rod ensures that the correct caulk gap will be created around all door and window openings on exterior walls. The gap is predetermined by the factory-applied closed-cell backer rod that is properly aligned and adhered to the vinyl casing bead. This approach eliminates the need to install the backer rod separately, saving time and ensuring a consistent, normal gap width and depth of 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. When installed and caulked properly, a bead with an integral backer rod provides added water protection from water penetration. And I'm sure you've seen these and perhaps even spec'd them. PVC casing bead, it's got the backer rod adhered to it. If it's wood frame construction, you butt this up against your window or door opening and then caulk the groove. But if it's masonry construction and the window is set back into the masonry unit as it's supposed to be, you just take this, flip it around the other way, and butt this up against the window frame, the flange, and then caulk it. It's just another added layer of protection. That's all we're looking for. And to be perfectly clear, it's not required in the AMA standard and it's not required in the code. It's just considered a best practice that you may wish to consider, something to look at. And again, not required by the standard, not required by the code. It is just an alternate method to give you an added layer of protection. All right. Now, this is 6.4.9.1. In cases where shims cause interference with the application of the backer rod or sealant, trim excess shim material to allow for continuous air and water seal on the inside. Sealant shall be tooled in such a way as to not interfere with the placement of any interior trim on the inside of the window opening. 6.9.3. It is critical that the perimeter interior air and water seal between the window and sill pan flashing is able to withstand the induced loads. Special care needs to be applied to the interior corners, and that's if you're using a sill pan, which you generally don't see in most masonry construction. And then after stucco or other cladding is installed in the exterior of the wall, install an exterior perimeter sealing joint between the window and the cladding using backer rod and sealant. And again, it just depends. If it's masonry construction with a brick veneer or stone veneer, or if it's masonry construction with stucco, it's just going to depend on what is being designed as to how you're going to seal the perimeter on the exterior. And as I showed you, that vinyl casing bead with the backer rod, that can be used in a lot of different areas for that additional layer of protection. Now, at the back end of the AMA standard, they give you some specific details. Here is one for the head. Okay. Notice that we've got our masonry block. We have flashed the block. We have our buck installed. And notice that we have our flashing installed over the buck. But this is what they're talking about, leaving the buck raw on the interior face. Because you're going to use pressure treated lumber, right? And it has a moisture content of about 19%. So you want the raw edge here exposed to the interior so it can dry out. And here's your interior air and water seal. And then this is a good example of what we've been doing. Just caulking the interior, or the interface rather, of the stucco with the window frame right at the flange. But this is where I was saying you could take that stucco bead with the vinyl and the adhered backer rod and use that to butt up against the flange and then caulk that area there. That would work. And then, of course, come on, computer. They have a detail for the jamb, which is pretty much similar to what you just saw for the head. Same thing. Got the back side of the buck raw. Got your interior air and water seal, and so on. They even give you a detail, folks, for the precast sill. Yeah. You flash the top of the precast sill. The flange has got sealant behind it. You still provide an interior air and water seal. Of course, that precast sill is installed per the manufacturer's specs. Absolutely. All right. think I got one more detail here to show you. Yeah, same thing here. This is the drainage sill. Discontinuous or no sealant behind the flange. So if any water does penetrate, it's got no place to go but out. Either way. Either way. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to conclude the last of our presentations for the day. Hope you got something good out of it. If nothing else, a good refresher. Anything you want to talk about? Anything we missed? Is that it? We all done? Questions, comments? Uh, Okay, well, let's see any real questions coming in.